Thomas Webb had never imagined that learning an alien language would become the most important thing in his life. For 6 months, he had been studying the ancient tongue of the Draken people aboard the Celestial Gateway Station, a massive structure floating in neutral space where dozens of species lived and worked together. His teacher, an elderly Draken named Corvith, had been patient beyond measure, guiding him through the complex sounds that felt like trying to sing underwater while gargling stones. The learning center occupied the eastern wing of the station, where large windows displayed the endless canvas of space. Thomas walked through the corridors, passing by various alien species going about their daily routines. A group of crystalline beings chimed melodically as they drifted past. Several insectoid traders clicked their mandibles in animated conversation. The station was a tapestry of life from across the galaxy, and Thomas felt privileged to be part of it. He arrived at classroom 12 and pressed his palm against the door panel. The door slid open with a gentle hiss, and Thomas stepped inside, ready for another challenging session with Corvith. But the Draken waiting for him was not his usual instructor. She was younger, her scales shimmering with a deep emerald green that caught the light from the viewport. Where Corvith moved with the careful deliberation of age, this Draken's movements carried a nervous energy. Her tail swayed anxiously, and her clawed fingers drummed an uneven pattern on the desk surface. When she turned to face him, Thomas saw eyes the color of molten gold, filled with uncertainty and something else he could not quite identify. "Hello," she said, her voice softer than Corvith's deep rumble. "I am Seraphine. Master Corvith cannot teach today. I will be instructing you in his absence." Thomas entered fully and allowed the door to close behind him. "Is Corvith all right?" Seraphine's inner eyelids flickered, a gesture Thomas had learned indicated emotional distress among the Draken. "He has fallen ill with scale blight. It is not life-threatening, but it causes great pain. He must return to our homeworld for treatment in the mineral baths. The journey and healing will take many weeks." "I'm sorry to hear that," Thomas said, settling into his usual chair. "Please tell him I wish him a swift recovery." "I will convey your words," Seraphine replied. She activated a teaching tablet, her movements less confident than Corvith's practiced ease. "Master Corvith informed me you were studying the subjunctive mood patterns, the ones that express wishes and hypothetical situations." Thomas nodded and pulled out his notes. He noticed that Seraphine had brought a leather-bound journal with her, its cover worn smooth from constant handling. Strange symbols were etched across its surface, and he could see pages filled with handwritten text peeking from its edges. The lesson began with awkward starts and stops. Seraphine clearly possessed deep knowledge of the language, her understanding of grammar flawless and comprehensive. However, she lacked the teaching rhythm that Corvith had developed over decades. She would begin explaining a concept, then pause and rethink her approach. She backtracked frequently to clarify points, and Thomas noticed her eyes kept drifting to that worn journal, as though it held answers to questions he had not asked. Despite the rough beginning, Thomas found himself engaged in a new way. Where Corvith taught with methodical precision, Seraphine offered cultural context. When Thomas struggled with a particular phrase construction, Corvith would simply drill the pronunciation until it became automatic. Seraphine instead explained the history behind the phrase, the emotional weight it carried in Draken society, the situations that would call for its use. "This expression here," Seraphine said, pointing to a line in Thomas's textbook, "you would use when speaking of someone who has passed beyond the physical realm. It carries both respect and continuity. In Draken philosophy, death does not sever a person's influence on the world. They continue through the memories and actions of those who remain." Thomas attempted the phrase, his throat straining to produce the layered harmonics that made Draken's speech so distinctive. The sound came out flat and wrong, lacking the proper resonance. Seraphine's tail stopped its nervous swaying. She leaned forward, her expression intent. "Try pushing the sound from deeper in your chest cavity. Humans have remarkably flexible vocal structures. You can produce sounds we cannot, but you must learn which muscles to engage." Thomas tried again, focusing on her instruction. This time the sound emerged closer to correct, though still clearly imperfect to his ears. "Better," Seraphine said, and surprise colored her tone. "Master Corvith spoke truthfully when he said you possessed determination. I see now that he was correct." They worked through the rest of the lesson with increasing ease. Seraphine relaxed into her role as she taught, her initial nervousness melting into genuine engagement with the material. Thomas found himself asking more questions than usual, drawn in by her willingness to explain the deeper meanings behind the words. Near the end of their scheduled time, Seraphine's datapad chimed softly. She glanced at the screen, and Thomas saw her entire body go rigid. The display showed a calendar with one date marked repeatedly in bright crimson. The date was 3 weeks away. Seraphine quickly darkened the screen, but not before Thomas noticed her claws had begun trembling. "Is something wrong?" he asked gently. "No," Seraphine replied too quickly. She began gathering her teaching materials with hasty movements. "We should conclude for today. You have made acceptable progress. We will meet again in 2 days at the same time." Thomas agreed, sensing she needed the conversation to end. As he stood to leave, he noticed Seraphine opening her worn journal once more. Inside he glimpsed intricate drawings of stars, constellation patterns rendered with painstaking detail. Mathematical equations filled the margins in tight script. At the top of the page was a date, the same one he had seen circled on her calendar display. Seraphine noticed his gaze and snapped the journal shut. Her tail resumed its anxious swaying. "Thank you for accommodating the change in instructor," she said with formal politeness. "I know my teaching style differs from Master Corvitha's approach." "Different is not bad," Thomas replied honestly. "I actually understood some concepts today that I've been struggling with for months. Master Corvith is an excellent teacher, but so are you." Something shifted in Seraphine's reptilian features. "Relief perhaps, or gratitude." "That is kind of you to say. I will see you in 2 days." Thomas left the classroom with his mind full of verb conjugations and tonal patterns, but also with questions. What made that date so significant? Why did Seraphine carry those star charts everywhere? And why did she look so profoundly sad when she gazed at them? He suspected the answers would matter far more than any grammar lesson. 2 days stretched into a pattern. Thomas met with Seraphine 3 more times over the following 10 days, and each session revealed more of who she was beneath the uncertain exterior. She still carried that worn journal everywhere, still glanced at her calendar with increasing frequency as the marked date approached. But she also smiled more readily, her teaching growing confident as she found her rhythm with him. During their 5th lesson together, Thomas achieved a breakthrough with a particularly difficult sound combination that required harmonizing 2 tones simultaneously. Seraphine actually brought her claws together in a sharp clap of approval, a gesture he had never witnessed from Corvith. "Excellent work," she said, her eyes bright with genuine pleasure. "You are beginning to feel the language rather than simply speaking it. That is when true understanding begins to take root." Thomas grinned despite the ache in his throat. "I have a good teacher." Seraphine ducked her head in a surprisingly bashful gesture for a creature with fangs the length of dinner knives. She opened her journal, and this time she did not immediately close it when Thomas's gaze wandered toward the pages. They were covered in notes, sketches of astronomical phenomena, and what appeared to be poetry written in flowing Draken script. "May I ask what you are working on?" Thomas ventured carefully. "Those star charts look quite complex." Seraphine's claws traced the edge of the journal. For a long moment, Thomas thought she would not answer. Then she released a breath that sounded like steam escaping from a kettle. "It is a celestial alignment. Certain stars form a specific pattern every 6 years as viewed from my homeworld. I am calculating when that same pattern will be visible from this station." "That is impressive mathematics," Thomas said. "Are you an astronomer by training?" "No. The alignment is important to me for personal reasons." She closed the journal but kept her claw resting protectively on its cover. "In Draken culture, we mark significant life events by the stars overhead at the time they occur. Births, deaths, bonding ceremonies. The sky becomes part of the memory, inseparable from the event itself. Thomas leaned back in his chair, recognizing this as the most personal information Seraphine had shared. We have something similar on Earth. Some cultures believe the stars influence destiny. Others simply use them to mark time and preserve important memories. How do humans honor their dead? The question emerged abruptly, as if Seraphine had been holding it back and it finally escaped her control. Thomas blinked at the sudden shift but answered honestly. Different ways depending on cultural background. Some hold ceremonies on the anniversary of death. Some visit graves. Some light candles or offer prayers. Mostly we talk about the person, tell stories about them, keep their memory alive through words and shared remembrance. Seraphine's golden eyes fixed on him with sudden intensity. Words. Yes, we do this as well, but in the ancient tongue. The language must be Draken for the memory to be properly honored. It is a way of ensuring the past is not lost, that those who came before remain part of those who continue forward. That is beautiful, Thomas said, and he meant it sincerely. Seraphine looked away, her tail curling around the legs of her chair. My mother was supposed to help me with something. A remembrance ceremony. But Master Corvatha's illness means she remained on our homeworld to care for him. He is her bonded mate. I am alone on this station, far from my clan. Understanding began to dawn on Thomas like sunrise breaking over a distant horizon. The calendar, the star charts, the careful calculation of dates. The alignment you are tracking is for someone who died. My sister, Seraphine's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Celestia died 6 years ago in a shuttle malfunction. She was traveling to the research colonies to begin her studies in xenobiology. The star pattern overhead on my homeworld when she was born will be visible from this station in 12 days. I need to speak the remembrance phrases while those stars are positioned correctly, or her memory will not be properly honored this year. Thomas felt the weight of what she was revealing. And you need someone who speaks Draken to perform the ceremony with you. Seraphine nodded slowly. The ritual requires at least 2 voices. One to speak the name, one to acknowledge it. Draken believe that memory lives in language, and language requires sharing. A name spoken alone dies in the air, unheard. A name spoken and heard lives forever in the space between voices. Is that why you took over Master Corvatha's teaching duties? Thomas asked gently. Not just to help him, but because you needed someone here who could speak the language. I did not know if you would be skilled enough, Seraphine admitted, her voice thick with emotion. I hoped. Master Corvath said you were progressing well, but the ritual phrases are complex beyond ordinary speech. They require perfect pronunciation, correct tonal emphasis, proper emotional resonance. An error would dishonor rather than honor. It would be worse than remaining silent. She looked at him directly, her golden eyes holding his. I have been too afraid to ask if you would help me. What if you said no? What if you tried and failed? I thought perhaps if I taught you more, if you improved enough, I could ask when the time came and you might be ready. Thomas understood her fear completely. The Draken valued honor and propriety above nearly everything else in their culture. Asking for help with something so sacred, and then having that help fail, would be worse than not asking at all. But she had no other options. Her mother was far away. Her clan was light years distant. Thomas was her only possibility. I will help you, he said without hesitation. Seraphine's head snapped up. You do not know what you are promising. The phrases are difficult even for native Draken speakers. For a human, they may be impossible. Then we have 12 days to prepare, Thomas interrupted. Teach me. Drill me as hard as necessary. I cannot promise I will be perfect, but I can promise I will try with everything I have. Your sister's memory deserves that effort. Seraphine stared at him, her reptilian face difficult to read. Then slowly, carefully, she opened her journal and turned it toward him. The pages were filled with phonetic breakdowns of Draken phrases, practice notes, translation guides, pronunciation tips. She had been preparing this for weeks, hoping against hope that someone would be able to help her. "This is what we must speak," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "These are the words that will keep my sister's memory alive for another year, that will honor her place in the pattern of stars and time." Thomas looked at the complex sounds, the intricate tonal patterns, the layered harmonics. It looked impossible, a task beyond his abilities. But Seraphine was trusting him with something precious, something irreplaceable. Humans had earned their place in the galaxy by refusing to accept impossible as an answer. Perhaps that stubbornness could serve a gentler purpose. "Then let us begin," he said. The next 12 days transformed Thomas's relationship with the Draken language from academic pursuit to desperate necessity. Seraphine drilled him relentlessly, their sessions stretching from 1 hour to 3, sometimes 4. She reserved the observation dome for their practice sessions, the one with the massive transparent ceiling facing the section of space where the star alignment would appear. Thomas's throat became perpetually sore from the constant practice. He drank endless cups of herbal tea that the station medical staff recommended for vocal strain. His regular duties suffered as he spent every spare moment reviewing the phonetic guide Seraphine had prepared. The phrases infiltrated his dreams, tangling with his normal speech patterns until his colleagues asked if he was feeling unwell. But slowly, painfully, progress happened. Thomas learned to feel the vibrations in his chest, to control the muscles in his throat that he had never consciously used before. The sounds began to take shape, becoming less alien and more natural with each repetition. "No," Seraphine said for what felt like the 100th time, her tail thumping against the floor in frustration. "The second tone must rise then fall. You are making it fall then rise. It changes the entire meaning from 'she who flew among stars' to 'she who fell from stars.' Do you understand the difference? It matters." Thomas tried again, his vocal cords protesting the strain. The sound emerged closer this time, the tonal shift more accurate. Seraphine's crest flattened against her head in satisfaction. "Better. Again." Between drilling sessions, Seraphine talked about Celestia. At first, the memories came reluctantly, pulled out like splinters. But as the days passed and Thomas proved he would not mock or dismiss her grief, the stories flowed more freely. Celestia had been curious about everything, constantly asking questions that made their parents laugh and their teachers despair. She collected rocks from different worlds, each one catalogued with obsessive detail. She sang off-key but with such enthusiasm that no one had the heart to tell her. She had been afraid of thunderstorms but loved watching meteor showers. She made terrible jokes that somehow became funny through sheer force of her delivery. She wanted to understand how life adapted to different environments, Seraphine said one evening as they practiced in the observation dome. She believed that by studying how creatures evolved on various worlds, she could unlock fundamental truths about existence itself. She saw patterns where others saw only chaos. Thomas listened, committing these details to memory. When he spoke the remembrance phrases, he wanted to truly understand who he was honoring. Celestia was not just a name or a collection of words. She had been a real person with dreams and quirks and a future that had been stolen from her. The marked date arrived with unsettling speed. Thomas woke that morning with his stomach tight with anxiety. He had practiced the phrases hundreds of times, but what if he made an error during the actual ceremony? What if his pronunciation was wrong at the crucial moment? What if he failed Seraphine when she needed him most? He met her at the observation dome as the station's artificial evening cycle dimmed the corridors. Seraphine was already there, wearing formal ceremonial robes of deep purple adorned with silver thread. Her scales had been polished until they gleamed. In her claws, she held 2 candles made from some crystalline substance that glowed with inner light. "The stars will align in 1 hour," she said quietly. "We should prepare ourselves." They sat in silence as the minutes passed, watching through the transparent dome as the station rotated slowly, bringing new sections of space into view. Thomas could feel his heart beating faster, his palms growing damp with nervous sweat. "Thank you," Seraphine said suddenly. "Regardless of what happens, thank you for trying. You did not have to do this. We are not bonded by blood or clan. You owed me nothing. Yet you gave me your time, your effort, your voice. That is a gift beyond measure." "Celestia deserves to be remembered," Thomas replied simply. "And you deserve to honor her properly. That is reason enough." Seraphine's eyes glistened with moisture. Draken did not cry the way humans did, but they could produce tears in moments of deep emotion. You would have liked her. She collected stories about other species the way she collected rocks. She would have asked you 1,000 questions about Earth and never grown tired of your answers. The stars began to align. Through the dome, specific points of light moved into position, forming the pattern that Seraphine had been tracking for weeks. It was beautiful, a geometric arrangement that seemed almost intentional, as though the universe itself was conspiring to create meaning from random positions. "It is time," Seraphine whispered. She lit the 2 crystalline candles and handed one to Thomas. They stood facing each other, the candles held between them, their combined light creating dancing shadows across their faces. Seraphine began the ceremony, her voice rising in the ancient Draken tongue, speaking words that had been spoken for thousands of years, words that connected past and present and future. Thomas listened, waiting for his part, his entire being focused on not making a mistake. Then it was his turn. He opened his mouth and let the sounds emerge from deep in his chest, feeling the vibrations in his bones. The phrases flowed out of him, imperfect but earnest, carrying the weight of all his practice and all his intention. He spoke of stars and memory, of lives that touched the universe and left marks that could not be erased. Seraphine responded, their voices weaving together in the call and response pattern of the ritual. Back and forth they went, speaking Celestia's name, acknowledging her existence, honoring her impact on the world. The words filled the observation dome, seeming to resonate with the stars themselves. Thomas stumbled once, his pronunciation wavering on a particularly difficult harmonic. But Seraphine did not stop or show frustration. She simply continued, and Thomas recovered, finding his rhythm again. They moved through the phrases together, 2 voices speaking as one, keeping a memory alive through the ancient power of language. When they finished, the candles had burned down to nubs. The star alignment hung perfect overhead, a pattern that would not appear again for 6 more years. Seraphine and Thomas stood in silence, the weight of what they had done settling over them like a gentle blanket. "It was not perfect," Thomas said finally, his voice hoarse from strain. "No," Seraphine agreed. "But it was true. And in the end, truth matters more than perfection." Celestia would have appreciated that. She was never perfect either, but she was always true to herself. She placed her clawed hand on Thomas's shoulder, a gesture of deep respect among the Draken. "You have given me a gift I can never repay. You have helped me honor my sister when I could not do it alone. That bonds us, human Thomas. By the stars overhead and the words we have spoken, we are now connected. My clan is your clan. My home is your home. Whenever you need assistance, I will answer. This I vow." Thomas felt emotion welling up in his chest. He had come to this station to learn a language, to improve his skills for his career. He had never expected to find this, a connection that transcended species and culture, a friendship forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. "Thank you for trusting me," he managed to say. "For letting me be part of something so important." They stood together in the observation dome as the stars slowly rotated out of alignment, the pattern dissolving back into randomness. But the memory would remain, preserved in the words they had spoken, alive in the space between their voices. Celestia had been honored. The past had been acknowledged. And somehow, in remembering death, they had both been reminded of the importance of living fully while the chance remained. The ceremony was complete, but Thomas knew the impact would last far longer. He had learned more than a language in these weeks. He had learned that humanity's place in the galaxy was not just about strength or technology or diplomatic treaties. It was about moments like this, about showing up for others, about honoring what matters to them even when it requires great effort. As they extinguished the candles and prepared to leave the observation dome, Seraphine paused at the doorway. "Will you continue your lessons with me? Even though the ceremony is complete?" "Of course," Thomas replied without hesitation. "We have only begun to scratch the surface. Besides, I want to hear more stories about Celestia. And I suspect you have other tales to tell as well." Seraphine's reptilian features arranged themselves into what Thomas had learned to recognize as a smile. "Then I will see you in 2 days. And Thomas? Thank you again. For everything." She left him standing in the corridor, his throat sore, his heart full. Above them, unseen but not forgotten, the stars continued their endless dance, witnesses to all that had been and all that would be. And in the space between voices, in the power of shared words, a memory lived on, honored and preserved for another year.